Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this tutorial, we are going to look at an example of how to make Momo Open API callbacks work on the sandbox. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get webhook URLs that we're going to use as our callback URL. And for this, I'm going to use a site called HookDeck. HookDeck, it can give you a webhook URL that you can use as your callback URL. So I'll just go to the site hookdeck.com, and then the first thing we'll have to do is sign in if you already have an account, and if you do not, you'll have to sign up for an account. So what I will do, I already have an account, so I'll just sign in using my account, which is Wiki API Guy Uganda at then I'll sign in. So after successfully logging in, what we are going to do, we're just going to go to creation of a connection. So you use the create connection button to create your callback URL. I'll create connection. I'll specify a name for my connection, which in this case I'll say MTN Momo API callback. And then under the advanced options, for testing purposes, I'll enable the get method. For the destination, I'll select destination type mock, because the way this works is it receives a request from whichever site is calling your URL, and then it forwards that request to a given endpoint. So for our case, we don't have any destination URL to send that request to. So we'll just use HookDeck's default mock API to receive those requests. What we are interested in is just seeing the requests and then the format of the request that is sent from the Momo API. So I think that's that. The rest I'll leave it to default, and then I'll click the create button. So seems to be taking long, so maybe there is a field that you've forgotten to fill. Okay, yeah, I'll get this. For this, I'll just put in the same thing for my destination, and then I'll click create, and they'll create for me the connection, and they'll give me my connection URL. So this will work as my callback URL. So I'll take this, save it somewhere, and then we have our callback URL. So to test this, I'll just open a new tab and then paste in that link and then run. So now I go back to HookDeck and I go under my requests. I should be able to see the last request that we made, which is this, the details of our last request that we made. You can see the details. It's a get, doesn't have any body. So I'll send another request. I'll do a post. So I'll just do another request that is a post, just to be sure that the post is also working. So I'll do a post, and then I'll put in maybe my data is here and my data is API guy. Then I'll send this. I've got a success. So if I refresh this, my other request is already there with my body. So we are going to configure this URL that we got as our callback URL on sending our transactions to the Momo API. And when the transaction is completed on the Momo API, that data will be posted to this endpoint. So we have our URL. Now the next step is to go to the Momo developer portal, create an account, and then send a request using that account. So right now I'll just go to Momo developer. It's Momo developer, yeah, that. And then I'll sign in. I think okay. I need to create an account on this. So welcome back. I have successfully logged on to the Momo developer account using my account that I've created. So the first thing I will do, I will come to products, and then I will subscribe to the collections product since I'll be testing using collections. Collections, and then I agree. I say, just name these collections, and then I subscribe. When I'm done subscribing, it will take me to the profile page, or you can just go to the profile link here, and then you'll have your subscription key under your profile. So you can use either the primary key or your subscription key, but I'll take the primary key. I'll just copy this, no worries, it's test account. So this is my subscription key. Now the next step I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an API user and then an API key. And then after that, we'll proceed to sending the actual request. So I'll quickly do go to API subscriptions, user sandbox provisioning. Now look for this endpoint that has API user and it's a post. Just get this, go to my postman, create a new request. I post this, it's a post, and I'll pass in the headers. I'll go to the headers, I'll add the subscription key, which is should be OCP APIM subscription key. Get this, I'll pass this. Then in the body, which is very, very important bit, I'm supposed to pass this body here. And for the provider callback host URL, this should be this. I'm supposed to pass the domain bit of my callback URL. So my callback URL is this, and the domain bit of it is just this hkdk.events. That's my callback provider callback host, which is the domain or subdomain part of my callback URL. So I'll get this and then pass it here. I think I need another header, which is the X reference ID. So this X reference ID, it's just a UUID version 4, which becomes your API user. So I'll just go to just create a UUID version 4. Just go to any online generator. I'll generate one. How many? Okay, let me just get 10. Generate, so I'll get this. So this becomes my API user. So I can safely say this is my API user, and this value is what I pass in the X reference ID. So just to recap, when I'm creating the API user, I pass two headers, the subscription key, which we got from the profile page of the developer portal. I also need an X reference ID, which is a UUID version 4. I can get this online. And this becomes my API user. Then for the body, I'm supposed to pass the provider callback host, which is the domain part of my callback URL. My callback URL is this, and the domain part of it is this. So this is what I pass on creating my API user. This is important because it is validated when you're sending your request for a transaction. So I'll proceed to send the request, and getting access denied due to missing subscription key. Make sure to include subscription key in your requests. So I guess yes, I get it. I missed the word key here. It's supposed to be OCP APIM subscription key. I'll send the request again, and boom, 201 created. So I've successfully created my API key, which is this, API user, which is this. Now I need to proceed to create my API key. I'll save these requests under this, give it a name, collections, API user. So that one is saved. I'll create a new request, proceed to create the API key. I'll go to this link. It's a post, takes in X reference ID, and then it creates for us the API key. So I'll get the URL, paste it here. It's a post. Still for this, I need the header, the subscription key. This header is very, very important, and it's mandatory for all requests to the Momo API. So it's important to not forget it, else you'll get that error that we saw previously. Then for the X reference ID, we pass here our API user that we just recently created. So I'll come here, get our API user, and then we pass it here. It's a post request, but point to note, we don't pass anything in the body. We don't pass any body. We just set the headers, and then we send the request. Still, I'm getting an error, so I'm passing a wrong subscription key. My subscription key is this. So I need to pass this. Now send the request, and boom, they'll return to me the API key. So we have both our API user and API key, and we can proceed to the step of sending the transaction. But before we do that, we need to generate a token, which is required on posting the transaction. I'll first save this request for creation of API key. and then we'll proceed to create the token. So the example we are going to use is for a request to pay, whereby we are collecting money from a customer. So, but before you send that payment request, you need to generate a token. So we'll generate the token. So that's under collections, which is the product we subscribed to. And then we look for create access token. It's a post method. So we'll get the URL, paste it here. It's a post. And as I said, we need the headers for the OCP APIM subscription key. So we'll get our subscription key, which is the collection subscription key. It's this one. Now we need to do, we need the authorization header. And for the authorization, we do basic authorization. So we do basic authorization, and then we base64 encode our API user colon API key. So we'll do this and base64 encode our API user and then our API key. So this is the value we are going to base64 encode to get our authorization value. So I'll just use an online tool, base64 encode for testing purposes. We'll encode this. Then it will get us the value that we need to pass as our authorization. So instead of this, I'll replace it with the result of the encoded value. So this is the value we pass for our authorization. So we'll get this, and then I'll put it here. An important thing to note is there is a slash at the end of this endpoint. If you skip it, you'll get an error. So still it's a post and it doesn't take in anybody. So I'll send the request. So I'm getting an error. Login failed. So that means there is a problem with our credentials. So we need to double check, what did we do wrong? Go back to see what we base64 encoded. Base64 encoded API user and API user, which is non-right. We're supposed to base64 encode API user and API key. So this is the value you are supposed to. I had made a mistake. I had put here API user and here API user. It's supposed to be API user and API key. So I'll go back, paste the value here, and then encode. And I'll get this result. It's what I need to pass here. Please note the basic word, the basic keyword, and the space that comes before the value that you've base64 encoded. So we'll update our authorization value, and then we'll proceed to send the request. So this is our token. We'll save this request. Call it collections. Token create. So the last bit, which is the core of this tutorial, is to send the actual transaction request. So I'll create a new request. Now go back to our documentation. We are interested in sending a request to pay, which is I'll get request to pay. It's a post. Then I'll get the URL, paste the URL here, change the method to post. We'll update our headers. So as we said, this header is a must OCP subscription key. We'll first set that value, update it to a subscription key. Then we're just going to go a bit back to the documentation and then look at the different headers for this endpoint. So the other header that is required is the authorization. And the authorization for this uses a bearer token. So you use a bearer token, and the token is the token we obtained from our previous request. So authorization, ideally, for request to pay is supposed to be a bearer and then your token that you got from a previous request. That's the syntax of the authorization for request to pay. So add the header here, and then we'll come to our token request and get the token, and then just put it here such that it's clear. Copy that value and then put it here. That's the authorization header. The other header we'll have to look at, I'll first skip the rest, is X target environment. It's important. Ideally, this tells MTN whether to execute your request on the production environment or the test environment. And for the sandbox, the value is standard, which is sandbox. So pass sandbox for that value. Now the other header is X reference ID. Now this X reference ID uniquely identifies your request to pay. And it's also a UUID version 4. So we'll go back to our site where we generated our UUIDs, then say generate 10. Wait for it, pick one, and then use this. This must be unique for every request you send, for every request to pay you send. Then the other header, if we go back to our documentation, is the X callback URL. Now this is very important. This is where you pass your callback URL that you want MTN to send the callback to after the transaction has been completed. The completion can be either the transaction has been successfully completed or the transaction has failed. So here we pass our actual callback URL. And for our case, we had our callback URL as this. Now, something important to note is Momo API Sandbox supports only HTTP. So I'll remove the S here and just do HTTP. And then pass that value here. So those are the headers that we need. Let me see if I missed anything. Subscription key, authorization, X target environment, X reference ID. Okay, I think we are good. So we'll go to our body, select row, it's JSON. So here is where you pass the transaction details. So I'll go to the documentation just to get the sample body. Then I'll just fill in the right values. For example, the amount, I would say 1,000. Currency, it's standard. On Sandbox, it's euro. external ID, I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. MSISDN, I'll say 7, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then here I'll just put message, pair message. Here I'll put pay message. Pay message. So just to recap, when we are building our request to pay, we specified the X callback URL, and this takes in the actual value of our callback URL. And for sandbox, this has to be HTTP. For production, it has to be HTTPS. So that's one key important difference that has to be noted. And then we've submitted the body. So we can just go back a bit to our callback where we are monitoring it from. We can refresh. As you see, we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4 requests. So we're going to post the transaction, and then we see if we'll get a callback of the status of that request from the Momo API. I'll proceed back to my postman, then I'll send the request. I've got 202 accepted, and this means the Momo API has received my transaction and it's processing it. So when it finishes processing the request, it sends a request to my callback URL. So I'll go back to hook deck to check if there's anything that has been posted. Yes. This before we didn't have this, so it has been posted, and if we check, these are our transaction details with the additional transaction status and then the MTN transaction ID. And yes, that's how you make callbacks work on the MTN Momo API. For testing purposes, another webhook site that works the same way as hookdeck.com that you can use is, I think it's webhook.site. Yes, so you can also get a free callback URL from webhook.site. So I usually use these two sites to test callbacks on Momo Sandbox, and you can use either of them. If this is not working, you can try out this. So this is the structure of the callback URL, of the callback body that you receive from the MTN Momo API. Of course, you can test out different scenarios using the different test numbers as documented. For example, if you want to see what would be the structure in case a request fails, you can go to the documentation and get some of those test numbers that are listed for testing. I think it's under use cases, and then sandbox use case, if I remember well, and then sandbox use case. So here are the different test numbers. For example, if I'm looking for to test maybe a failed transaction, you can check. Let me see. I'll just pick a random test number, and then I'll use this in my request. I will update the transaction ID and then the amount to 2000. And then important, we need to get a new X reference ID, because if you try to post with the same X reference ID, it will fail with an error of resource already exists. So we need to get a new X-reference ID. This has to be unique for every request you use, for every request you send. So I'll come to my UUID generator, pick a new X-reference ID, pass it here, then send the request. 202 accepted. So go to our book to see if anything has been sent yet. And yes, we've got a new request here. And yes, you can see status, and this one has a reason. So that's how our callbacks work. And I thank you for joining me. In the next tutorial, I'll just do an illustration of how callbacks work in production. It's the same process, but I want to give you a feel of both the test bed, sandbox, and the production environment. Thank you, and please do not forget to hit the subscribe button. Have a wonderful day.